Attention all landlords, and there are millions of you, and I've got some news. Earlier this month, Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell shared a Labour policy idea, the right to buy for tenants in private rented accommodation. In an effort to make things fairer, you're right, landlords would be forced to sell their homes to a tenant at a discount, of course, if the tenant wanted to buy it and had been living there for more than 3 years. Now, a part of me understands this thinking. Alas, it stops there. Because from higher rents and shorter tenancies through to fewer rental properties, not to mention removal of people's pension reserves, the unintended consequences of this are vast. And if we want people to have access to opportunity, whether to own a home or otherwise, then please, can we start thinking about how to pull people up and not keep trying to pull people down?
I dread the thought of a Corbyn government, and this is one of the reasons why, because this is a state-sponsored smash-and-grab raid. It reeks of Bolshevism. It's communist. And let's not forget that John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, is a self-confessed Marxist. He's proud of the fact he's a Marxist. They haven't said what discount it will be. And what he's tapping into is this idea that all landlords are Peter Rackman, the notorious landlord of the 60s and 70s. A lot of people who've bought properties under the buy-to-let are middle-class people whose pensions have been completely ruined, first by Gordon Brown's measures, then by George Osborne's measures. So they've invested their life savings into small flats. They rent them out, often not with managing agents. It's their pension, it's their investment. They're good landlords. They look after that property, and I think, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to throw another big carrot to young people to vote Labour, and I think it's a really, really sinister policy.
I think you're right that we shouldn't demonise landlords. There are loads of ordinary people who've worked really hard to become landlords. My issue is not with them. My issue is with the system that we've ended up with, which is where for a lot of people, the only way they can actually fund their old age is by buying buy-to-let properties. And it's quite understandable that's what they've done. But the reality for younger people is that they can't afford to buy a home, that they end up in short-term rentals. Now, there are so many consequences of this. For example, we talk about the problems of integration we have in our society, about loneliness, about social exclusion. Not being able to settle down in a community, to own a home or to have a long-term protected tenancy is one of the fundamental reasons we have social breakdown. It has all kinds of repercussions beyond just being able to get on the housing ladder. And I don't think this is a perfect idea, but I do think we need to do something radical if we're going to make home ownership and being able to live. This is such a basic right to be able to just have a home that you can settle down in, raise your children in. Now, a whole generation is excluded from that, and it's a very serious problem. So it's not the fault of landlords, but something's got to give.
Just to back that up, since 1997, house prices have gone up in England by 173%. Wow. Whereas for young adults, real incomes rose by 19%. I mean, that's the situation we're currently in. And it's not about, I mean, you use the phrase, you shouldn't drag people down, you have to bring people up. There is a net wealth in the country. If you're going to bring people up, it's going to involve a certain amount of pulling people down in order to make the country fairer. That's just the maths of the situation.
But you don't do it like this. It is wholly unfair that presumably some state body decides what the discount should be. Let's say that I own a second property and they've suddenly decided that my tenants have the right to buy it. And by the way, what they don't realise, and I spoke to a housing expert on this, is that people actually will decide not to let their properties. They'll effectively board them up and just wait for them to go up in value as and when the economy ever comes back. So instead of increasing the housing stock, people will just say, I'm not going to let this happen. I'm not going to let my mum's old house or my dad's old house. And that's what will occur.
And the other thing is, Nick, they'll sell them. If they think a Labour government's coming, they'll get rid of them, they'll sell them, and there'll be a glut of properties on the market. And who will buy up those properties? The dodgy landlords that John McDonnell doesn't want.
It's absolutely Marxist. As you said, it is a Marxist policy. Now, you're right that we do need to address, and you're right, of course, it's awful. I mean, those figures that you just quoted are horrific, but this is not the way to address it. I assure you, this is not the way.
They should build some houses. Why doesn't the Labour government build some houses?
Knock down Nelson's column and build some houses there, Isn't that you'd be in favour of that?
Well, that could be a debate for next week. This Conservative government has actually done more than any recent government to limit buy-to-let acquisitions because of the changes in stamp duty have had a real effect on landlords. And I think the fact that a Conservative government has done this is a recognition that this is a structural problem in our housing market. But I completely agree, this isn't a substitute for social housing. We need social housing. We need mixed communities. We need affordable homes, not affordable in the way that, for example, Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, cast it, which was something like 85% of market value. I forget the exact statistic, but genuinely affordable, where it's a ratio of income that ordinary people who live in cities like London or Manchester or Bristol
you've got to free up the planning
can
applications.
afford.
You've got to take a coach and horses through the planning regulations, and for the purpose of the debate, you've got to be happy to have some flats put in your back garden.
Do you accept that we need to build more
totally,
social housing?
But that means just set ablaze the planning regs. That's what stops it.
There's lots of brownfield sites going a train to most train stations up and down the country. There's loads of land all around those trains. Build on it.
But this is, for me, one of the challenges with the whole Corbynomics, if we want to call it that, because on the face of it, it sounds sensible. Like, of course, people, I want people to be able to have a home that they live in. So, yeah, of course, that's what I said, I understand. But then when you actually start applying some common sense and digging underneath the surface and you understand the unintended consequences, because I don't think people are horrible and they're desperately trying to do horrible things, but I think that unintended consequences are just being massively overlooked. You're saying, right, OK, we'll have a load of people that'll do a big sell-off of all of their buy-to-let properties. What's that going to do then to all the people that have scrimped and saved and stretched themselves to buy property when it's up here? They're going to plunge straight into negative equity. And there's just, I sit here and I think it's just not being thought through.
But there are also millions of people who can't afford to buy a home because prices have run so far away from them. So we have a problem. No, but we do have a problem that one of the most realistic investments many people can make is in buy-to-let property. The housing market should not be a place for people to store their wealth and provide income. It's not a sensible strategy because it's creating a generation that are completely excluded, not just from home ownership, but from having a long-term
my parents are both doctors, and yet for me the idea of buying a house is simply out of the question.
Really?
Not until I don't see that happening for the next 10 years, minimum.
But how important is it to you to buy a house?
Well, the idea of having a stable location that I can live in. I mean, I moved around a lot as a kid. 14 houses by the time I was 14. So the idea of having...
You should pay the rent. This is and it's not so necessary.
But they're two different things, though, aren't they? Having a stable home is one thing, but owning a house is another. And that's what I'm trying to get my head around. For a young person, how important is it to own your house?
But it's not fully stable if the landlord has ultimate control over the place you're living in.
I don't think it bothers... I'm not being critical. I don't think it bothers you that much. See, my generation, Andrew, Mum and Dad told you, don't rent, try and get a mortgage, invest, get property. And I'm not criticising it. I think it's very different for guys your age, right?
Wait, half of millennials won't be able to buy a home until they're 45, right? A lot of people start having a family before that. I would say when you start having small children, having a stable home. No, well, nursery-age children. No, but I mean, teenagers can get around more easily. When you have, when you're pregnant or you have small children, you really need a community. You need people around you who support you, who you know. The problem is there's not really anything in between. We don't have protected tenancies. We don't have rent control. So either you own a home and you can guarantee you'll live there, or you're at the mercy of 6 months' notice and then you have to leave.
Because this is like, and I don't want to make it personal. So if you think this is me stepping on the line, then I apologise. But what I don't understand is, if we take your situation, you just said your parents are doctors, and you just described that house prices have gone up all of this amount over the years. So then I would see a scenario where parents have got property that they've probably grown out of now because kids are old and fleeing the nest. They've got huge amounts of capital that they've made in that property. In that scenario, I don't understand them. Well, why wouldn't the parents, if they feel it is a priority for their child to get onto the housing ladder, sell their house, downsize, take some of the capital equity that they've got from their property and give it to their child to help them onto the market? Why should the state be doing that job?
Well, for starters, not everybody has not everybody owns a house that they can downsize and then do that for. Most people, I mean, many parents don't have a house that many parents are still renting at this point. It's just not. Most people don't have that option.
Talking of the housing market, we must move on. Now, whether you think he's a champion of democracy or a pompous pain in the arse, it's hard to imagine the House of Commons without John Bercow in the Speaker's chair. But after 10 years in the role, politics' answer to Marmite will hang up his gown for the last time on October the 31st and finally give his vocal cords a well-deserved rest. Now, love him or loathe him, no one can deny Squeaker Bercow has an unmatched talent for managing to silence squabbling MPs with banter of the highest order. Let's take a look back at some of his best bits.
Order! 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 I don't need any help from anybody transferring from a secondary position. If you don't like it, you're perfectly entitled to your view. I couldn't give a flying flamingo what your view is. You need to write out 1,000 times. I will behave myself at Prime Minister's questions. Order!
Yes, for keeping the House of Commons in order. John Bercow, you are our straight talker of the week.